If you look at a map of South Africa, you may notice something peculiar. There's a big hole in it. And no, that's not a mistake or a suspiciously placed water feature. That's actually another country, an independent nation entirely surrounded by South Africa. For reference, Lesotho is a small, completely landlocked country located in southern Africa and practices a unique culture that sets them apart from their neighbors. The Boers, who had been pushed out of their original lands by British colonization, were eager to expand their territory, and they soon came into conflict with the Sotho people. Now let's talk about Lesotho's geography. Much of this story is dictated by Lesotho's particular geography. You see, unlike most countries, Lesotho is entirely mountainous. The British didn't colonize Lesotho like they did many other African territories. When South Africa gained independence from the British in 1910, Lesotho was still a British protectorate. Despite facing numerous challenges throughout its history, including economic and social inequality, Lesotho has managed to preserve its identity as a sovereign nation. The country is still a constitutional monarchy with King Letsie III as its head of state. Although the monarch's powers are limited, and the country is governed by a parliament elected by the people, Lesotho's rich cultural heritage is evident in its music, art, and traditional clothing. The vibrant blankets and patterns worn by the Basotho people are a particularly striking example of this cultural pride. The blanket, known as a kaross, is not only a practical item of clothing, but also a symbol of identity, status, and belonging. Each pattern and color tells the story of the wearer and their community. These blankets are often passed down from generation to generation, carrying with them the history and traditions of the Basotho people. The British government decided to keep Lesotho separate from South Africa for several reasons. Despite the odds stacked against them, they have managed to maintain their independence and preserve their unique way of life. Lesotho is the only country in the world that is entirely surrounded by another country. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thank you for watching. First, Lesotho's unique geography and challenging terrain made it less appealing to the South African government, which was focused on developing the more accessible regions of the country. Additionally, the British wanted to maintain a buffer state between South Africa and the neighboring territories of Swaziland and Mozambique, which were still under Portuguese control. This would allow the British to prevent any potential threats from these territories while also maintaining their influence in the region. Finally, the British were committed to upholding the existing treaties and agreements with Lesotho, and they felt that incorporating it into South Africa would violate those agreements. Therefore, the British government decided to keep Lesotho as a separate entity, even after South Africa gained independence. This decision had a profound impact on the history of both Lesotho and South Africa. It allowed Lesotho to maintain its independence and unique cultural identity, but it also created a lasting sense of separation between the two nations. Despite being physically connected, Lesotho and South Africa have developed their own distinct histories, identities, and perspectives, which continue to shape their relationship today. Instead, they kept it as a protectorate. Here's why. As we mentioned earlier, Lesotho is completely landlocked. This means that it has no access to the sea, making it difficult to trade and communicate with other nations. Additionally, Lesotho is surrounded by South Africa, which poses its own set of challenges. As the Boer republics grew in power and influence, they began to exert pressure on Lesotho, threatening its sovereignty and the safety of its people. Realizing the limitations of their geographical position, the Sotho leaders, including Moshoeshoe I, sought out the protection of the British Empire. The British, who were eager to expand their colonial holdings in Africa, saw Lesotho as a valuable asset and agreed to establish a protectorate over the territory. This meant that Lesotho would remain independent, but under the protection of the British, would provide military support and guidance in exchange for certain concessions. This arrangement allowed Lesotho to maintain its independence while still benefiting from the power and resources of the British Empire. It also ensured that Lesotho would be protected from outside threats, such as the Boers, who continued to pose a significant danger to the region. Even its lowest point is nearly 1,000 meters above sea level. And its highest peak, Thabana Morena, towers over 3,400 meters up. Because of this, much of Lesotho's territory is uninhabitable, and the country is essentially made up of a single large plateau. These high elevations make Lesotho one of the coldest countries in southern Africa and also one of the least hospitable. The rugged terrain and challenging climate made it less appealing to outside invaders. It did provide a significant advantage to the Lesotho people as they fought back against those that tried. As the Boers began to encroach on Lesotho territory, Moshoeshoe I realized that he needed help to protect his people. They built a series of mountain forts and defensive structures that allowed them to effectively defend their land and hold off invading forces. This included building homes and villages on top of mountains, which made them very hard to reach and even harder to attack. They also utilized the natural resources of the mountains, such as rocks and trees, to build fortifications and weapons. And they developed strategies that took advantage of the terrain, such as attacking along mountain ridges or using the high ground to their advantage. Thanks to these efforts, the Lesotho people were able to successfully defend their territory from outside invaders, even when outnumbered and outgunned. Their skill and determination in battle ensured that Lesotho remained free and independent, despite the best efforts of their enemies. He reached out to the British Empire, which at the time was rapidly expanding its colonial holdings in Africa. And in 1868, the British government formally recognized Lesotho as a British protectorate. This agreement granted the British the right to protect Lesotho from external threats in exchange for certain concessions, including the right to trade in the territory and the right to use its natural resources. But they weren't always unified. They formed into a single group under a man named King Moshoeshoe I in the early 1800s. Before then, they were just various small tribes scattered throughout the region. At the time, most of the territory was inhabited by the powerful Zulu kingdom, which would become a major force in the region during the 19th century. But as the Zulus grew in power, so did other smaller groups, particularly the Lesotho people, who gradually united under Moshoeshoe I to form the modern nation of Lesotho. By the 1820s, his alliance had grown to include several local tribes who were drawn together by a combination of common ancestry, language, and a desire to resist the growing Zulu threat. Under his leadership, the Lesotho people flourished, expanding their territory and establishing themselves as a major player in the region. However, their success did not come without its challenges. Its population is just over 2 million people, and its capital and largest city is Maseru, which is also right on the border with South Africa. Despite being completely surrounded by South Africa, Lesotho has its own unique flag, its own government, and its own national anthem. However, if you look closely at a map, you will see that Lesotho isn't really all that independent. While it does have its own internal borders, those borders are completely contained within the borders of South Africa. I said, how can a country exist inside of another country? Well, it turns out there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this unusual situation. Countries so close to South Africa that you can't even tell where one begins and the other leaves off. So how is this possible? How does Lesotho exist within South Africa without causing any confusion or complications? The answer, it turns out, is a little more complicated than you might think. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be answering the question, why is Lesotho a country inside South Africa? So first, who exactly are the Lesotho people? Lesotho is home to the Lesotho people, an ethnic group that speaks the Sotho language as the Lesotho people grew in power and influence. They quickly attracted the attention of their neighbors, including the powerful Zulu kingdom, the British Empire, and a group of Dutch settlers known as the Boers. So while Lesotho was able to maintain its independence, it did have to do so under the watchful eye of the British Empire. In addition to these physical barriers, the Lesotho people also took advantage of their knowledge of the terrain to further protect their territory. Now, let's go back to talking about diplomacy. Remember that key part of this story? Okay, now let's fast forward to South Africa's independence. And finally, let's discuss Lesotho's legacy. Today, Lesotho remains an independent country with its own unique culture, language, and traditions. Overall, Lesotho is a testament to the resilience and determination of the Lesotho people,